A story we continue to follow here in the Fox 5 newsroom involves the aftermath of that ICE raid at a Hyundai plant here in southeast Georgia. And one of the things that state lawmakers are looking to do is prevent these sorts of situations in the future. How can we make sure foreign workers here in Georgia are set up for success?
We're following a massive ICE raid at a Hyundai plant in Georgia. Officials say roughly 450 undocumented migrants were apprehended. Now, Thursday's raid was carried out by multiple state and federal law enforcement agencies, including ICE, the FBI, and the Georgia State Patrol.
South Korea will reportedly send a chartered flight to Atlanta as early as tomorrow to bring back hundreds of workers detained during a massive ICE raid on a Hyundai plant last week.
Federal sirens cut through the early morning fog. Red and blue lights danced across the vast Hyundai plant in Montgomery, Alabama, as federal agents swarmed in. Workers, many of them immigrants who had clocked in for their daily shifts, suddenly found themselves in handcuffs. The air was thick with confusion, fear, and disbelief. Some described it later as something straight out of an action movie. A factory turned into a crime scene, livelihoods turned upside down in seconds. If you value in-depth analysis on America's trade, global economics, and policies shaping our future, make sure you subscribe to Traveling Vibes. This is where facts meet context, and where every story is more than just a headline. I also want to hear your perspective. Leave a comment below with your best insight or takeaway from this report. I'll personally go through them, and the most thoughtful comment will be pinned at the top. So, hit subscribe, share your voice, and be part of a community that looks deeper than the surface. This was no ordinary raid. It was the largest federal immigration raid in U.S. automotive history. Hundreds of employees lined up outside, some clutching lunchboxes, others frantically trying to call their families. Mothers were separated from children, longtime employees treated like fugitives. The sound of wailing sirens echoed not just across the parking lot, but across America's conscience. And at the center of this chaos stood the man whose policies set it all in motion: Donald Trump. His sweeping immigration agenda, built on deportations, raids, and visa crackdowns, collided head-on with his tariff-heavy trade war. What was sold to the public as a plan to protect American jobs instead left factories in turmoil, investors fleeing, and entire communities devastated. Before we go deeper into this shocking story, make sure you subscribe to Traveling Vibes, the channel where we bring you the real consequences behind the headlines. Hit that subscribe button, share this video, and let your voice be part of the conversation. Now, back to the story. The raid was just the spark. Within days, the financial damage began to surface. Hyundai, one of the largest foreign employers in the American South, reported billions in projected losses. EV production lines stalled. Contracts with suppliers fell through. Even Hyundai's partnership with LG, aimed at creating new electric battery plants, was put on hold. The reason was simple. Without workers, there is no production. And without production, there is no investment. Trump's policies didn't just target undocumented labor. They shook the entire foundation of the U.S. auto sector. For the thousands of workers at Hyundai, the consequences were immediate and brutal. Entire families lost their breadwinners overnight. Rent went unpaid, mortgages slipped into default, and communities that once thrived on factory wages found themselves on the brink of collapse. But this was not just about economics. It was about dignity. Workers described being lined up like criminals, paraded in front of cameras, and treated as if their years of service meant nothing. Korean American communities across the South reported a surge in racial profiling and harassment. Fear spread like wildfire, with families afraid to go to work, to shop, even to send their kids to school. Meanwhile, the international fallout was swift. In Seoul, the South Korean government issued a sharp rebuke, calling the raid a violation of trust and demanding answers from Washington. Officials hinted at retaliation, increased scrutiny of U.S. expatriates in Korea, delays in joint projects, even reconsidering American participation in key energy and technology partnerships. For America's alliance with South Korea, forged over decades of shared defense and trade, this was a breaking point. What was supposed to be a show of strength at home turned into a public humiliation abroad. And yet, for Trump, the raid was spun as a victory. From the podium, he declared that no one is above the law and promised that the crackdown would save American jobs. But on the ground, the opposite was happening. Suppliers shut down. Small businesses tied to Hyundai's operations, Restaurants, trucking companies, parts makers began laying off their own workers. The local economy bled jobs at a pace faster than anyone had predicted. The raid became more than a story about immigration. It became a symbol of Trump's broader economic experiment. An experiment that weaponized tariffs, immigration enforcement, and nationalist rhetoric in ways that left America's manufacturing future hanging by a thread. And the deeper question emerged. Had America's nationalism backfired? The Hyundai raid was meant to be a demonstration of control, a message from Trump to his supporters that he was cracking down on illegal labor and protecting American jobs. But what followed was not control. It was collapse. Within a week, Hyundai's U.S. operations reported an immediate halt in several key production lines. Thousands of vehicles sat unfinished on the factory floor, waiting for parts and workers who would never return. Logistics companies tied to Hyundai shipments saw contracts dry up. The supply chain that connected Alabama to Detroit, Seoul, and beyond was suddenly broken. By the numbers, the fallout was staggering. Economists estimated that more than $3.5 billion in value evaporated in just the first month. Car dealerships across the country reported shortages of new Hyundai models. Prices climbed. Consumers, already squeezed by inflation and higher interest rates, were left stranded. But the damage didn't stop at Hyundai. This raid sent shockwaves across the entire U.S. auto sector. Ford, GM, and Tesla suppliers began voicing concerns that their own workforce could be targeted next. Foreign investors, the lifeblood of American manufacturing, started pulling back. A South Korean investment fund worth nearly $8 billion quietly froze its projects in the U.S., citing an unstable political environment. And for workers, the human cost mounted daily. Families once dependent on steady paychecks from the Hyundai plant were forced to rely on food banks. Children described seeing their parents handcuffed at work. Churches in Montgomery and surrounding towns organized emergency aid drives. The community spirit was strong, but the fear was stronger. One mother, interviewed anonymously, broke down as she described her teenage son asking if they would lose their home. She had worked at the plant for nearly 12 years. "I thought we were safe. I thought this was our life now." And then, in one morning, it all disappeared. For Korean-American families, the raid was a trauma that carried deeper scars. Reports of racial profiling surged. Asian workers in unrelated industries said they were being stopped, questioned, and harassed in ways they hadn't seen since the 1980s. Advocacy groups warned that the raid didn't just target undocumented workers. It inflamed xenophobia, turning entire communities into scapegoats. And then came the diplomatic storm. In Seoul, outrage boiled over. South Korean officials summoned the U.S. ambassador, demanding explanations. President Yoon's government called the raid an unprecedented breach of trust and hinted that economic retaliation was on the table. Retaliation soon came in the form of trade pressure. South Korean regulators announced heightened inspections of U.S. goods entering their ports. Joint technology projects with American firms faced sudden delays. Negotiations on defense cost sharing, already a sensitive issue, grew tense. For decades, the U.S.-Korea alliance had been a cornerstone of stability in East Asia. But now, Trump's raid was threatening to undo years of cooperation. Analysts in Seoul began openly discussing the possibility of deepening ties with China, a nightmare scenario for Washington. Inside America, political voices split sharply. Trump's allies hailed the raid as proof of his toughness, framing it as a stand against globalism. But critics warned that this was economic sabotage disguised as patriotism. Economists from Princeton to MIT lined up to show how Trump's policies were actually hurting American workers, the very people he claimed to protect. The contrast was striking. Trump on stage, declaring victory, and American towns on the ground, declaring bankruptcy. By mid-year, the Hyundai raid was being studied in business schools as a case of self-inflicted economic damage. Tariffs had already raised the cost of imported parts. Immigration crackdowns had drained the workforce. Together, they created a perfect storm that paralyzed production. This was the middle act of America's manufacturing tragedy, where policies designed to secure the nation's future instead began dismantling it piece by piece. And yet, the story was far from over. Because the raid wasn't just a domestic disaster. It was the opening shot in a new phase of global economic realignment. allies questioned America's reliability. Rivals like China, Mexico, and Vietnam moved quickly to seize market share. And Hyundai itself began looking north, to Canada, as a safer, more stable place to relocate its investments. The irony was impossible to ignore. The raid meant to keep jobs in America was pushing them out. And as Trump doubled down, the world was left asking, had America just handed over its manufacturing soul to its competitors? The Hyundai raid marked a breaking point. What began as a single immigration enforcement action in Alabama quickly spiraled into a symbol of America's deepening crisis, a crisis of confidence, economics, and alliances. The images of federal sirens, factory workers in handcuffs, and unfinished vehicles gathering dust on production lines became emblematic of a much larger story: the unraveling of America's manufacturing edge. At the heart of this collapse was a paradox. Donald Trump had promised to bring jobs back, to punish corporations for leaving, and to shield American workers from global competition. But his strategy of tariffs and raids did the opposite. By turning foreign investors into adversaries and immigrant workers into targets, his policies eroded the very foundation of industries that depended on stability, skilled labor, and international cooperation. And that's the paradox. In trying to protect American jobs, Trump's raids and tariffs are tearing the system apart. Families are hurting, factories are stalling, and America's allies are losing trust. The question now is simple: has nationalism gone too far? If you found this breakdown valuable, make sure to hit like, subscribe to Traveling Vibes, and share this video so more people can join the conversation. The world is changing fast, and together, we'll keep uncovering the truth.